The phone rang at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, which should have been my first warning that nothing good was coming. I was in my home office, half watching a Mariners game on my laptop while reorganizing my toolbox. Being a locksmith means you accumulate a stupid amount of small parts over the years, and I'd been meaning to sort through the mess for months. Mr. Brennan? The voice was male, professional, with that particular edge cops develop after years of delivering bad news to strangers. That's me? This is Detective Harper with the King County Sheriff's Office. I'm calling about a case we're revisiting, a missing person case from 2019. Your wife's name came up in our records. I stopped moving. The tiny brass pins I'd been sorting suddenly felt very heavy in my palm. Missing person? What are you talking about? A man named Dennis Volkov. He was reported missing in August 2019. We're taking another look at the file. Your wife, Elizabeth Brennan, sold Mr. Volkov a property that spring. We'd like to ask her a few questions about their interactions. My mind went blank for a second, then kicked into overdrive. Liz sold dozens of properties a year. I barely remembered most of them, but something about the detective's tone made my stomach tighten. Is she... you don't think she had anything to do with... We're just gathering information, Mr. Brennan. Standard procedure when we reopen cold cases. Is your wife available? She's showing a house. Should be home around 10. We'll be in touch to schedule an interview. Have a good evening. He hung up before I could ask anything else. I sat there staring at my phone like it had just bitten me. The game played on in the background, crowd noise rising and falling, but I couldn't focus on it anymore. Dennis Volkov. The name meant nothing to me. August 2019. That was, almost 5 years ago? I remembered because we'd taken a weekend trip to the coast to celebrate her numbers. The front door opened at 10:12. Liz came in carrying her laptop bag and a stack of folders, looking tired but satisfied. She had that particular glow she got after a successful showing, the one that meant she'd probably lock down another eager buyer. Hey! She kicked off her heels and dropped everything on the kitchen counter. God, what a night. The Riverside property finally got an offer, $20,000 over asking. That's great. My voice sounded weird even to me. She looked up, frowning slightly. You okay? Detective called. The change in her expression was subtle. Most people wouldn't have caught it. But I'd been married to this woman for 8 years. I knew every micro-expression, every tiny tell. Her eyes widened just a fraction, and her lips pressed together for maybe half a second before she smoothed her face back into neutral. What? Why? Something about a missing person case. Guy named Dennis Volkov. You sold him a house in 2019. Dennis? She shook her head slowly, like she was searching her memory. Dennis Volkov. God, I barely remember that. What happened to him? He went missing, apparently. They're reopening the case. Missing? She leaned against the counter, one hand pressed to her forehead. Jesus, that's awful. I remember the sale, but I didn't know him well. Just the usual client relationship. Do they think something happened to him? They didn't say much, just that they want to talk to you. Okay. She nodded too quickly. Okay, yeah, of course. I'll help however I can. God, that's so disturbing. Missing since when? August 2019, he said. She was quiet for a moment, staring at nothing. Then she grabbed her phone and started scrolling through old calendar entries, her movements a little too precise, a little too controlled. I'm trying to remember the timeline. That was such a busy summer. I'd have to check my old files. I watched her tap through screens, her face illuminated by the blue glow. Something felt off. Not wrong exactly, just carefully managed, like she was performing the role of confused concern rather than actually feeling it. Did you know him outside of the sale? I asked. What? No, why would I? Just asking. Well, I didn't. Her tone had gone sharp. Jake, this is freaking me out. A client went missing and now police are calling? This is seriously disturbing. I know. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to understand. She put her phone down and came over to me, sliding her arms around my waist. The gesture felt automatic, rehearsed. There's nothing to understand. I sold a man a house years ago. Apparently something bad happened to him. That's horrible, but I don't know anything about it. She pulled back to look at me. You believe me, right? Of course. But even as I said it, something nagged at me. Something in the way she'd reacted to the name, that split second of recognition before the confusion set in. Something in how quickly she'd gone defensive when I asked a simple question. She kissed my cheek and pulled away, gathering her things. I'm exhausted. I'm going to take a shower and go to bed. You coming up soon? Yeah, in a bit. I listened to her footsteps on the stairs, the creak of the bathroom door, the rush of water through the pipes. Then I opened my laptop and typed Dennis Volkov missing King County 2019 into the search bar. The results were sparse. A brief mention in a local news blog from August 2019. Dennis Volkov, 44, reported missing by his sister after he failed to show up for a family dinner. Last seen leaving a construction site in Redmond. Vehicle found abandoned near Lake Sammamish. No signs of foul play, but no body recovered either. The case had gone cold within months. The article included a photo, average-looking white guy, receding hairline, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting, nothing remarkable. Nothing that explained why a detective would be calling about him almost 5 years later. I clicked through to the property records database, something I had access to through my business. Found the sale Liz had handled in June 2019. Small rambler in a decent neighborhood. Sold to Dennis Volkov for $385,000. Pretty standard transaction from what I could see. But then I noticed something else. The property had required significant renovations before Volkov moved in, and the contractor listed on the permits was someone I recognized, Blake Morrison. House flipper, did custom renovations, drove an absurdly oversized truck with vanity plates. I'd met him exactly once at one of Liz's work events, and I'd immediately disliked him. Too much cologne, too firm handshake, too intense eye contact. The kind of guy who called everyone buddy and acted like every conversation was a negotiation he was winning. Liz had worked with him on several properties. She'd mentioned him often enough that I'd started tuning it out. Blake thinks we should stage it differently. Blake found a great contractor for the kitchen. Blake says the market's about to shift. Blake this, Blake that. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. The shower had stopped running upstairs. I could hear Liz moving around the bedroom, drawers opening and closing. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe there was nothing here except a tragic coincidence and my own overactive imagination. Maybe I should just go to bed and forget the whole thing. But I didn't. Instead, I grabbed my keys and headed out to the garage where Liz's car was parked. She'd been too tired to pull it all the way in, had left it in the driveway instead. I told myself I was just checking to see if she needed anything moved, just being helpful. I was lying to myself. The car was unlocked. I popped the trunk. Inside was the usual chaos. Emergency kit, jumper cables, reusable shopping bags, a cardboard box full of open house signs. I started to close it, then stopped. There was something wedged in the corner behind the spare tire. Something small and rectangular wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. I pulled it out. It was a phone. Not her regular phone, which was currently upstairs charging on her nightstand. This was a cheap prepaid burner, the kind you bought at convenience stores with cash, the kind you used when you didn't want records. My hands were shaking as I tried to turn it on. Of course. I stood there in the dark garage holding a phone that shouldn't exist, and felt something crack open inside my chest. Not my heart, something harder and colder than that. Something that had been sleeping for 8 years and was now wide awake and paying attention. Upstairs, the bedroom light went off. I slipped the phone into my jacket pocket and went back inside. I didn't sleep. Liz was out within minutes, her breathing deep and even, completely undisturbed. I lay next to her staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the burner phone in my jacket hanging on the chair across the room. At 2 a.m., I got up and went down to my workshop in the basement. This was my space, the place where I kept all my professional tools and equipment, lockpicks, key cutters, security cameras, the whole arsenal of the trade. Being a locksmith wasn't glamorous, but it paid well, and I was good at it. Really good. The kind of good that meant I could open pretty much anything given enough time and patience. I pulled the phone out and connected it to a universal charger. While it powered up, I made coffee and tried to organize my thoughts into something coherent. Maybe it was innocent, maybe she'd found it somewhere and forgot about it. Maybe it was for work, some weird client situation that required discretion. Maybe there were 1,000 reasonable explanations that didn't involve my wife keeping secrets. The phone chimed, powered on, no password. That was the first surprise. She'd left it completely accessible, which meant either she'd never expected anyone to find it, or she didn't think there was anything incriminating on it. I opened the messages. There weren't many. Most of the conversations had been deleted, but a few remained. One contact was saved simply as B. I scrolled through the thread. B, meet at the Riverside property tonight, after the inspection. Liz, can't. Jake will notice if I'm gone too long. B, you can't keep doing this. We need to talk about it. Liz, I know, I'm scared. What if he finds out? B, he won't. But we have to deal with Dennis before he talks. I read that last message 3 times. We have to deal with Dennis before he talks. My coffee had gone cold. I didn't remember putting it down. There were more messages, but they were fragments, deleted conversations that only showed up as metadata timestamps. The phone's photo gallery was empty except for one image, a screenshot of a map location. I zoomed in. It was an address in Redmond, an area zoned for commercial and light industrial. The pin dropped on what looked like an abandoned property. I copied the address into my phone and pulled up Street View. It was a half-finished renovation project, a house that had been gutted and then apparently abandoned mid-construction. Weeds growing through the exposed foundation, windows boarded up, a faded "For Sale, As Is" sign leaning in the overgrown yard. The property had been listed by Liz's real estate company in 2019. It had never sold. I looked at the messages again, looked at the contact name B, looked at the date stamps that matched the month Dennis Volkov had disappeared. Blake Morrison, Blake the contractor, Blake who'd worked with Liz on multiple properties, Blake who she'd mentioned constantly until suddenly, sometime in late 2019, she'd stopped mentioning him at all. We have to deal with Dennis before he talks. I sat there in my basement workshop at 3 a.m., holding a phone full of 5-year-old messages, and felt the floor drop out from under everything I thought I knew about my life. The thing about being a locksmith is that people tell you their secrets without meaning to, not directly, but in the way they act, the things they want secured, the places they don't want you to look. I'd learned to read people the way I read locks, understanding that sometimes the easiest way in wasn't through force, but through patient observation. I'd been observing Liz for 8 years. I thought I knew every tumbler and pin in her, but apparently I'd missed something. Apparently there was a whole other mechanism I'd never even known to look for. I forwarded all the messages to my own email, then deleted the sent items from the burner phone, copied the map screenshot, documented everything with photos. Then I powered the phone back down and slipped it into a Ziploc bag. Tomorrow I'd put it back in her trunk like I'd never found it. But tonight, I needed to understand what the hell I'd just stumbled into. I pulled up everything I could find on Dennis Volkov. His social media was still active but frozen in time. The last post from August 12th, 2019. A photo of a beer and a sunset with the caption, "Finally getting this place fixed up right." The location tag was the property Liz had sold him, the one Blake Morrison had been contracted to renovate. I dug deeper, found forum posts where Dennis had been complaining about the renovation work. Shoddy electrical, water damage behind new drywall, corners cut. He'd threatened to file complaints with the county about permit violations. Blake Morrison had responded in a few of those threads, defensive and dismissive. The arguments had escalated. Then suddenly both of them stopped posting. And then Dennis Volkov disappeared. We have to deal with Dennis before he talks. I spent the rest of the night building a timeline. June 2019. Liz sells Dennis the property. June-July 2019. Blake renovates, Dennis discovers problems, threatens legal action. July 2019. Phone messages between Liz and Blake discussing Dennis as a problem. August 12th, 2019. Dennis's last social media post. August 14th, 2019. Dennis reported missing. The connections were there. Thin, circumstantial, but there. And underneath it all, the question that was eating through my brain like acid. What had my wife done? I made it through the next morning on autopilot. Liz woke up cheerful, made eggs and coffee, chatted about her schedule like nothing had happened. I smiled and nodded and tasted nothing. The burner phone was back in her trunk, exactly where I'd found it. She had no idea I'd ever touched it. The detective called, she said suddenly, checking her own phone. They want me to come in tomorrow afternoon, just a voluntary interview, he said, nothing formal. You want me to come with you? No, it's fine. It's probably just routine questions about the sale. I barely remember the guy, honestly. I'll just tell them what I can, and that'll be it. She was so calm, so completely unruffled. If I hadn't seen those messages, I would have believed her completely. Okay, let me know if you need anything. She kissed me on the cheek and grabbed her keys. I've got 3 showings today. I'll be back around 6. I watched her drive away, then immediately got in my truck and headed for the abandoned property in Redmond. It was worse in person than in the photos. The windows were indeed boarded up, but the boards were old and weathered. Someone had spray-painted a dick on the front door. Very classy. I parked a block away and walked up. The property was technically still listed, still owned by some LLC that was probably waiting for values to recover. The yard was a disaster of wild grass and blackberry bushes. Beer cans and fast food wrappers scattered around suggested local kids used it as a hangout spot. I checked to make sure no one was watching, then approached the back door. Someone had already broken the padlock. It swung open with a rusty creak. The inside smelled like mold and old paint. Exposed studs, torn-out drywall, bare concrete floors covered in debris. This had been someone's attempt at a flip that had gone horribly wrong. I pulled out my flashlight and started looking around. I wasn't sure what I was searching for. Evidence? 5 years after the fact? That was naive at best, stupid at worst. But I needed to see this place, needed to understand why it had been important enough for Liz and Blake to meet here. The main floor was gutted, but empty, just construction waste and decay. I climbed the stairs carefully, testing each step. The second floor was the same. Stripped bathroom, empty bedrooms, holes in the walls where plumbing had been rerouted. I was about to give up when I noticed the basement door. It was closed, which was odd given everything else had been left hanging open. I tried the knob. Locked. Now that was interesting. I went back to my truck and got my picks. The lock was cheap, took me maybe 30 seconds. The door swung open on darkness and the smell of damp earth. The basement stairs were intact but steep. I descended slowly, flashlight beam bouncing off concrete walls. This level was more finished than the upper floors, with actual drywall and what looked like an attempt at creating separate rooms. A space heater sat in one corner, coated in dust. Empty beer bottles lined one wall, a camping chair, a sleeping bag rolled up in the corner. Someone had been staying here. Recently, judging by the relative lack of dust on the sleeping bag. The words echoed in my head. Careful about what? Hiding evidence? Covering up whatever they'd done to Dennis Volkov? Or just hiding an affair they didn't want discovered? I needed to get out of here before she came down to the basement. But I was trapped. The only exit was up those stairs, and she was right above me. Her footsteps paused. Then I heard her come to the top of the basement stairs. She stood there for a long moment, and I knew she was debating whether to come down or not. Please don't, I thought. Please just leave. Her phone rang. She answered immediately. Harper residence, she said, her tone completely different now, smooth and professional. Then, yes, detective. Tomorrow at 3 works fine. I have all my old files ready. A pause. No, my husband doesn't need to be there. This is about a client interaction from years ago. I'm happy to help however I can. She listened for another moment. Of course, I understand. See you tomorrow. She hung up, stood there for another few seconds. Then she walked away, her footsteps fading toward the front of the house. A minute later, I heard the front door slam, then her car engine. I waited another 10 minutes before moving, just to be absolutely sure. Then I climbed the stairs on shaking legs and got the hell out of that house. I drove home on autopilot, my brain cycling through what I'd just witnessed. Liz and Blake together at the property where Dennis Volkov had last been seen, talking about being careful, about making sure nothing tied back to them, about the police asking questions. We were careful. Careful about hiding an affair, or careful about hiding something worse. I got home before Liz and immediately went to my office. I uploaded all the photos I'd taken at the property to an encrypted cloud account, then deleted them from my phone. I documented everything I remembered from their conversation, typing it out while it was fresh. Then I just sat there, staring at the wall, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with this information. Option 1, confront her. Demand answers. Watch her lie to my face or admit something that would destroy our marriage. Option 2, go to the police. Tell Detective Harper about the burner phone and the property and what I'd overheard. Turn my wife over to law enforcement based on fragments and suspicions. Option 3, keep digging. Learn everything before making any moves. Become someone different than the trusting husband who'd been blindly living his life while his wife kept secrets. I chose option 3. The front door opened at 6:15. Liz came in looking windswept and tired. Long day? I asked. So long. I swear buyers are getting more demanding every year. Everyone wants move-in ready in this market. She dropped her bag and came over to kiss me. Her lips were cold. What did you do today? Couple service calls. Recade a house in Bellevue. Nothing exciting. Sounds better than my day. She headed for the kitchen. I'm starving. Want to order something? Sure. Thai? Perfect. We ate on the couch, watching a crime procedural neither of us cared about. She curled up against me like always, commenting on the show, laughing at the bad dialogue. Everything completely normal on the surface. But I felt the phone in her pocket, felt the weight of her secrets pressing against my ribs, felt the distance between what she was showing me and what she was hiding. You nervous about tomorrow? I asked during a commercial. The detective thing? Not really. Like I said, I barely remember the guy. I'll answer what I can, and that'll be that. You think they have leads? About what happened to him? She shrugged. No idea. Maybe someone came forward with information. Cold cases get reopened all the time for random reasons. Right. She looked up at me. You're being weird. Am I? Yeah, all quiet and distant. What's going on? I should have said something then. Should have asked about Blake, about the burner phone, about why she'd been at that property today. But I didn't. Just tired, I said. Long week. She studied my face for a moment, then kissed my cheek. Get some sleep early tonight. You look exhausted. We went to bed at 10. She fell asleep within minutes, her breathing deep and even. I lay awake next to her, watching the ceiling fan turn slow circles in the dark, and wondered if I'd ever really known her at all. At midnight, I got up and went back to my office. I had work to do, research to conduct, evidence to gather. I was done being the person who didn't know. I was done being the husband who trusted blindly. I had no idea what I was going to find, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, I was going to be ready for it. As the story unfolds, hit the hype button, like, subscribe, and write in the comments. Would you forgive them or walk away? The interview with Detective Harper was scheduled for 3 p.m. at the county sheriff's office. Liz left at 2:30, wearing her professional realtor outfit, carrying a folder of old paperwork. She kissed me goodbye like it was any other day. Wish me luck, she said. You'll be fine. I watched her drive away, then immediately grabbed my jacket and followed. Not to the sheriff's office. I had a different destination in mind. Blake Morrison's current job site was easy to find. His company had a website listing active projects, and he wasn't shy about self-promotion. Today he was working on a kitchen renovation in a neighborhood called Cascade Heights, one of those areas where houses cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. I parked across the street at 3:15 and watched. Blake's truck was in the driveway, impossible to miss with its lifted suspension and chrome everything. 2 guys in work clothes were carrying materials from the truck to the house. Blake himself was visible through the front window, gesturing at something and talking on his phone. I waited. At 4:20, the work crew packed up and left. At 4:35, Blake came out, locked the house, and got in his truck. He pulled out and headed west. I followed. Tailing someone isn't as easy as movies make it look, especially in afternoon traffic. You have to stay close enough not to lose them, but far enough back not to be obvious. Blake drove like an asshole, cutting people off and speeding through yellows. I struggled to keep up without drawing attention. He stopped at a gym in Kirkland, went inside carrying a duffel bag. I parked where I could see the entrance and settled in to wait. 45 minutes later, he emerged, hair wet, changed into fresh clothes. He got back in his truck and drove to a sports bar called Rookies, parked, and went inside. I sat in my truck across the parking lot, debating my next move. I could go in there, confront him directly, demand to know what he and my wife had done 5 years ago, but that would tip my hand. Once he knew I was asking questions, he'd tell Liz, and they'd both go defensive. Better to watch. Better to learn his patterns, his routines, his vulnerabilities. I was so focused on the bar entrance that I almost missed her. Liz's car pulled into the parking lot at 5:40. I sank lower in my seat, pulse hammering. She parked 3 spaces away from Blake's truck, got out, looked around quickly, then walked into Rookies. She'd told me the detective interview would take a couple hours. She'd said she was going straight there and then coming home. But here she was, less than 3 hours later, meeting Blake Morrison at a bar. I gave them 5 minutes, then got out and approached the entrance. Rookies had big windows facing the parking lot. I stayed to the side, looking in from an angle. They were in a booth in the back corner. Blake was leaning forward, talking intently. Liz had her arms crossed, face tight with stress. It wasn't a romantic meeting. This was business. This was serious. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could read body language. Blake was agitated, making sharp gestures. Liz kept shaking her head. At one point, she pulled out her phone and showed him something. He grabbed her wrist, not violently but firmly, and said something that made her go still. Then he let go and sat back. They both looked exhausted. I retreated to my truck before they could spot me. 10 minutes later, Liz emerged first. She walked quickly to her car, head down, and drove away. Blake came out 5 minutes after that, got in his truck, and headed in the opposite direction. I followed Liz home. She got there 10 minutes before I did, timing it so I wouldn't know we'd both been out. When I walked in at 6:30, she was in the kitchen chopping vegetables like she'd been home for hours. "Hey," she said brightly. "How was your day?" "Fine. Yours?" "Long." The detective had a million questions. I barely remember half of what he asked. Something about the property sale, the timeline, who else was involved. Super tedious. "What did you tell him?" The truth, that I sold Dennis a house, that was our only interaction, and I have no idea what happened to him. She kept chopping, not looking at me. He seemed satisfied. I think that's the last we'll hear about it. Every word was a lie. I could see it now, the way she constructed her responses, the way she controlled her face and voice. She was good at it. Really good. Which made me wonder how many other lies I'd swallowed over the years without noticing. That's good, I said. I'm glad it's over. Me too. She finally looked up and smiled. Let's have a normal evening. No more stress. We made dinner together. We watched TV. We went to bed. She fell asleep easily while I lay awake, mind racing. At 2 a.m., I got up and went to the basement. I pulled up Blake Morrison's social media and started digging. His Facebook was public, full of project photos and self-promotional posts. His Instagram was more personal, gym selfies, his truck, pictures with buddies at Mariners games. I scrolled back to 2019, found photos from the summer Dennis Volkov disappeared, Blake at work sites, Blake at bars, Blake at a lake with a blonde woman who wasn't Liz. Normal life, nothing suspicious. But then I found something interesting. A photo from August 15th, 2019, the day after Dennis was reported missing. Blake and 3 other guys on a fishing boat, smiling and holding up their catch. The caption read, "Much needed getaway with the boys. Sometimes you gotta disconnect and reset." The timing was interesting. Dennis disappears on the 14th, and Blake's immediately taking an alibi-establishing fishing trip. Maybe it meant nothing, or maybe it meant Blake had known to establish his whereabouts right when it mattered. I kept digging, found forum posts where Blake had argued with other contractors about business practices, found complaints on the Better Business Bureau website about shoddy work, found reviews on HomeAdvisor calling him unreliable and overpromising. Blake Morrison was not beloved in his industry. I pulled up his business records next. His LLC had been formed in 2017. The company had mediocre financials, nothing impressive. He'd had 3 different business partners over the years, which suggested either volatility or poor judgment. Then I found the lawsuits. 2 from 2019, both from clients claiming defective work. One had been settled out of court, the other dismissed on a technicality. Neither plaintiff was Dennis Volkov, but the pattern was clear. Blake cut corners, got called on it, and fought dirty to avoid consequences. Dennis Volkov had been threatening to expose similar problems. Dennis had been a liability to Blake's reputation and potentially his business. We have to deal with Dennis before he talks. I sat back and rubbed my eyes. The question wasn't whether Blake had wanted Dennis gone. The question was what he'd actually done about it and how involved Liz had been. I checked the clock. 3:15 a.m. I needed sleep, but my brain wouldn't stop. I pulled up the property records for the abandoned house in Redmond. The LLC that owned it was registered to an address that matched Blake's business office. He'd been the one renovating it before the project was abandoned. He had keys, he had access. He could come and go without anyone noticing, and Liz had been meeting him there, both 5 years ago and recently. I thought about the sleeping bag and camping chair in the basement. Someone using the space regularly? Someone who needed privacy? Was Blake living there? Hiding there? Using it for something I couldn't see yet? My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop asking questions about things that don't concern you. Someone knew I was digging. Someone was watching. I didn't respond, didn't move, just sat there processing the implications. Blake? Had he somehow figured out I'd been following him? Or was this Liz, using a number I wouldn't recognize to send a warning? Another text came through. Dennis Volkov is none of your business. Let it go. I grabbed my laptop and started searching for ways to trace the number. It came back as another burner, just like the phone in Liz's trunk. Untraceable, anonymous. Which meant whoever sent it knew what they were doing. I thought about responding, playing dumb, asking what they meant. But that would confirm I'd received the message and was paying attention. Better to ignore it. Better to let them think maybe the texts hadn't worked. I deleted both messages and shut down my phone. Then I spent the next 2 hours installing security cameras around my house. Small ones, hidden in normal objects. One in the living room disguised as a smoke detector. One in the garage. One covering the driveway. I linked them all to a cloud account Liz didn't know about. If someone was watching me, I was going to watch back. I went upstairs at 5:30, just as dawn was starting to break. Liz was still asleep, curled on her side, face peaceful, looking at her hurt in a way I couldn't describe. This person I'd loved for 8 years, who I'd built a life with, who I'd trusted completely. How much of it had been real? How much had been performance? I got in the shower and let the hot water run over me until the tank went cold. Then I got dressed and went to work, because what else was I supposed to do? The next few days were careful normalcy. Liz went to showings, I handled service calls, we made dinner together and watched TV and pretended everything was fine. She didn't mention the detective interview again. I didn't mention the texts, but I was watching. Constantly. I installed tracking software on my truck that I could access from my phone, started documenting every place I went, every person I talked to, created a timeline spreadsheet with dates, locations, and patterns. On Thursday, Liz had an evening showing that ran late. She texted at 8 p.m. saying she'd be home by 10. I used the time to go through her home office. Her filing system was meticulous. Every client had a folder, every transaction documented. I found the Dennis Volkov folder easily. Thin, just the basics. Listing agreement, inspection reports, closing documents. Nothing unusual. But tucked in the back was a separate folder marked Riverside Project, the abandoned property. Inside were notes in Liz's handwriting, project budgets, contractor estimates. Blake Morrison's name appeared everywhere. I found emails printed out and filed. One from Blake to Liz in July 2019. We need to talk about the Volkov situation. He's threatening to go to the county. This could destroy both of us. Call me. Her handwritten response scrawled at the bottom, can't talk on main phone, will contact you other way. The other way being the burner phone, the phone she thought nobody knew about. I photographed everything and put it back exactly as I'd found it. In her desk drawer, under a stack of business cards, I found something else. A key, not a house key. This was small, brass, the kind that opened a padlock or storage unit. I pocketed it. Liz got home at 10:15, looking exhausted but satisfied. Close the deal, she said, dropping onto the couch. First-time buyers, super nervous, but they loved the place. Should close next month? That's great. I handed her the glass of wine I'd poured. Celebrating? Definitely. She took a long drink, then leaned against me. God, what a week. I'm glad tomorrow's Friday. Me too. We sat there in comfortable silence, her head on my shoulder, my mind spinning through everything I'd learned. The key in my pocket felt heavy. What did it open? Where was it supposed to be? Jake? Her voice was quiet. Yeah? You'd tell me if something was wrong, right? If you were upset about something? My heart rate spiked. Of course. Why? You've just seemed distant lately, distracted. I want to make sure we're okay. The irony was almost funny. She was worried about me being distant while carrying on whatever the hell she'd been doing with Blake Morrison for years. We're fine, I said. Just tired. Work's been busy. Okay. She didn't sound convinced. I love you. You know that, right? I know. She kissed me and went upstairs to bed. I stayed on the couch, the key burning a hole in my pocket, and wondered how much longer I could keep up this act before something broke. Friday morning, I called in sick to work and drove to a storage facility in Bellevue. I'd found the address on a receipt in the Riverside Project folder, and I was betting that's what the key opened. The facility was one of those massive complexes with hundreds of units. I showed the manager a fake ID I'd made using my locksmith equipment and said I was there to access Unit 347, my uncle's storage. The manager barely looked at me, just buzzed me through. Unit 347 was on the second floor, middle of a long hallway. I used the key. It fit perfectly. The unit was about 10 by 10, climate-controlled. Inside were boxes stacked neatly, labeled in Liz's handwriting. I opened them one by one. Financial records. Years of them. Property transactions, contractor invoices, bank statements. Most of it looked normal, legitimate business documents. But then I found the box marked private. Inside were folders for properties I didn't recognize. Transactions that weren't in Liz's official files. Cash receipts. Handwritten notes detailing under-the-table deals. Profits that had never been reported. Liz and Blake had been running side deals. Buying distressed properties through shell companies. Having Blake do cheap renovations, flipping them fast for maximum profit, and pocketing the cash without proper documentation. It wasn't exactly illegal if they'd paid their taxes, but the way it was hidden suggested they hadn't, and Dennis Volkov's property was in this box. I found the full file. Purchase documents showing the LLC that bought it was registered to Blake. Renovation invoices that were triple what Blake had actually spent, suggesting insurance fraud. Photos of the completed work that looked professional but according to Dennis's forum posts had been garbage underneath. They'd scammed him. Sold him a house through a secret deal, did the cheapest possible renovation, pocketed the difference, and planned to vanish before he could cause problems. Except Dennis hadn't been willing to let it go. He'd started asking questions, demanding inspections, threatening legal action. We have to deal with Dennis before he talks. I photographed every document in the box. Then I found something else. A handwritten letter from Blake to Liz, dated August 10th, 2019. Liz, we both know Dennis isn't going to stop. He's found too much. If the county starts digging, they'll uncover all of it. Not just this property, all the others too. We'll both lose our licenses at minimum, prison at worst. I know you don't want to hear this, but we need to make this problem go away permanently. Think about it. We've worked too hard to lose everything over one guy who can't let things go. I've got a plan. Meet me at Riverside and we'll talk. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the paper. Make this problem go away permanently. Dennis had disappeared 4 days after this letter was written. I forced myself to breathe, to think clearly. This wasn't proof of murder. Make the problem go away could mean paying him off, could mean finding a legal way to shut him up. The letter was damning, but not conclusive, except Dennis was missing, had been missing for 5 years. And Blake and Liz had both been lying about their connection to him ever since. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, locked the unit, and left. In my truck, I just sat there, trying to process what I'd learned. My wife was either involved in or had knowledge of something terrible. At best, she was complicit in financial crimes. At worst, I couldn't finish that thought. My phone rang. Detective Harper. Mr. Brennan, do you have a few minutes to talk? Sure. I wanted to update you. We've officially closed the Dennis Volkov case. New information came to light. Turns out Mr. Volkov is alive and well, living in Costa Rica. We were able to make contact through his sister. He left the country voluntarily in 2019 and never bothered to tell anyone. No crime was committed. I went very still. He's alive? Alive and well. Apparently he had some business failures here and decided to start over somewhere warm. Happens more often than you'd think. Anyway, your wife's interview was helpful in establishing timeline, but ultimately unnecessary. Case closed. Okay. Thanks for letting us know. No problem. Sorry for the disruption. He hung up. I sat there staring at my phone. Dennis Volkov was alive, in Costa Rica, living under his own name. Relief and rage warred in my chest. Relief that my wife wasn't a murderer. Rage that she'd still done something terrible and gotten away with it. Make this problem go away permanently. They'd accomplished that without violence. They'd just ruined a man's life so thoroughly he'd fled the country to escape them. And Liz had been lying about all of it. Hiding the affair, hiding the fraud, hiding her role in destroying someone. I started the truck and drove home. I didn't know what I was going to do with this information yet, but one thing was certain. I was done being the person who didn't know. I was done being the trusting husband. Now I needed to decide what kind of person I was going to be instead. The next phase of my plan required patience. I stopped actively sabotaging Blake's work sites, stopped spreading rumors, let things settle into an uneasy calm where they thought maybe I was backing off, but I was actually escalating, just more strategically. I'd created a detailed dossier, every property transaction between Liz and Blake, every corner Blake had cut, every client who'd been dissatisfied. Combined with Dennis's evidence of harassment, it was damning. But it wasn't enough yet. I needed something current, something that proved they were still operating outside the lines. I got lucky 3 weeks later. Liz came home excited about a new deal, a commercial property in Bellevue, zoned for mixed use, being sold by an elderly owner who wanted out fast. She and Blake were going in together on it. Flip it quick, sell high, split the profit. She told me all this over dinner, her enthusiasm genuine. She thought we were rebuilding, thought my coldness was thawing because I'd stopped actively antagonizing them. It's a great opportunity, she said. The building needs work, but the location is perfect. Blake thinks we can turn it around in 4 months. Sounds good, I said neutrally. Maybe when this deal closes, we could take a vacation. Get away for a while, just the two of us. Work on things. Maybe. She smiled like that was a victory. After she went to bed, I pulled up the property details. Found the listing, the address, the sales history. Then I did something I'd been practicing. I hacked into Blake's email. It wasn't hard. People are careless with passwords, especially people who think they're untouchable. Blake used the same password for everything, a combination of his birth year and his truck model. I'd guessed it on the 3rd try. His emails were a goldmine. Communication with Liz about the Bellevue deal. Plans to use the same shell company structure they'd used before. Contractors who'd do the work cheap and off-book. Invoices that would be inflated for tax purposes. They were doing it all again, the exact same scam they'd run on Dennis and dozens of other properties. I documented everything. Then I did something risky. I responded to one of Blake's contractor inquiries, posing as him, set up a meeting with a guy who did unlicensed electrical work, got him to talk on record about working without permits, about Blake's preference for cutting corners. I was building an active case of fraud, not ancient history but current crimes, and then I made my first major move. I contacted a reporter. Her name was Sarah Chen. She worked for the Seattle Times business section. I'd researched local journalists who covered real estate fraud and construction scandals. She'd written several exposés about corrupt developers and shady contractors. I sent her an anonymous email with carefully curated documents, just enough to interest her without revealing everything. Property transactions that didn't add up, shell companies that traced back to Blake and Liz, timeline patterns suggesting systematic fraud. She responded within hours. These are serious allegations. Do you have proof? I sent more documents, copies of invoices showing massive discrepancies between actual costs and reported costs, photos of shoddy work Blake had done, testimonials from former clients willing to go on record. I need to verify this independently. Who are you? Why are you doing this? I'm someone who was hurt by these people. The why doesn't matter. What matters is the evidence. You can verify everything I've sent. Can I contact you for an interview? No, but I can provide more information as you need it. Just start investigating. You'll find everything else yourself. She stopped responding, which meant she was either dismissing it as a crank or starting to dig. I hoped for the latter. Meanwhile, I escalated the pressure at home. Liz had been trying to have a real conversation for weeks. I'd been putting her off, staying distant. Now I decided it was time to engage. We should talk, I said one evening after dinner. Her face lit up with hope. Really? Really. I've been thinking about everything. About us. We sat down on the couch. She turned to face me, eager and nervous. I'm still hurt, I said. I'm still angry. But I understand relationships are complicated. People make mistakes. Yes, she said quickly. Yes, exactly. So I want to understand. Help me understand why you did it. The affair? All of it. The affair, the business deals, the lying. What was so important that it was worth risking our marriage? She took a breath. I felt trapped. Not by you, just by life. By always doing the right thing. Playing by rules, being the good girl. Blake represented freedom. He took risks, did things his own way, didn't care what people thought. It was exciting. So you had an affair because you were bored? No, I had an affair because I was scared. Scared I'd gotten married too young, committed too soon, locked myself into one version of life without exploring others. Blake was a way to feel like I still had choices. And the business deals? Those were practical. We found a way to make real money, not the steady but small income from legitimate deals. We could build something bigger faster. It felt smart. Even though it was illegal? It wasn't illegal. Ethically gray, maybe, but not illegal. The fraud wasn't illegal. The threats to Dennis weren't illegal. Her face tightened. That was Blake, not me. The Dennis situation got out of hand. I told Blake to back off, but he was paranoid about being exposed. So you weren't involved in threatening him? I was involved in trying to make him go away. But I didn't want anyone hurt. I just wanted him to take the settlement and drop it. But he didn't, so Blake escalated. Yes, and you let him. What was I supposed to do? He was already doing it. If I'd tried to stop him, Blake would have turned on me, too. So you were scared of Blake? Yes, I still am sometimes. He's not always stable when he feels threatened. This was interesting. This was a crack I could exploit. Are you afraid of him now? I asked. A little. He knows you're making trouble. He's getting paranoid, calling me constantly, asking what you're doing. I told him you're just hurt and angry, but you'll calm down eventually, but I don't think he believes me. What do you think he'll do? I don't know. That's what scares me. Blake doesn't handle pressure well, and you're putting a lot of pressure on him. Maybe you should distance yourself from him. Cut ties completely. I've thought about it. But we're in the middle of this Bellevue deal. If I back out now, he'll know something's wrong. So you're staying in business with someone you're afraid of. For now, until I can figure out how to extract myself safely. I nodded like I understood, like I sympathized. What if I could help with that? Help how? What if there was a way to end your partnership with Blake without him knowing you chose to end it? Make it look like outside forces broke you apart? She studied my face. What are you thinking? I'm thinking maybe instead of fighting each other, we should work together. Protect ourselves and cut Blake loose." Her eyes widened. "You'd help me?" "If you're honest with me from now on. If you give me everything I need to understand what happened. If you help me make sure Blake can't hurt us." "Jake, Yes, of course. Anything you need." I had her. She was so desperate to fix things, so scared of Blake, that she'd jump at any solution that promised safety. "Okay," I said. "Then start talking. I want to know everything about the Bellevue deal. Everything Blake's planning, every corner he's cutting." She told me, all of it. The shell company structure, the contractors who'd work without permits, the plans to inflate expenses and hide profits, the timeline for the flip. I recorded every word on my phone in my pocket. When she was done, I kissed her forehead. "Thank you for being honest." "Are we okay?" she asked, "and can we fix this?" "We're getting there," I lied. That night I sent Sarah Chen everything Liz had told me, every detail about the current fraud they were planning, everything that could be verified and exposed. She responded, "I've been verifying your previous documents. Everything checks out. If what you're sending now is accurate, this is a major story. I'm going to need to contact Morrison and Brennan for comment soon. Be ready. I'm ready." The article came out 2 weeks later. It was front page of the business section. Local realtor and contractor accused of systematic fraud. Photos of Blake and Liz, detailed documentation of their property flips, their shell companies, their pattern of cutting corners and hiding profits. Sarah Chen had done her homework. She'd interviewed former clients, reviewed public records, traced financial connections. The evidence was overwhelming. My phone rang at 6 a.m. the morning it published. Liz, hysterical. "Jake, have you seen the paper?" "No. What's wrong?" "There's an article about me and Blake. They're accusing us of fraud. They have documents, details about deals we did years ago. How did they get this information?" "I have no idea." "This is going to destroy my career. The licensing board will investigate. I could lose everything." "Maybe you should call a lawyer." "I'm calling Blake. We need to figure out how to respond." She hung up. I smiled. 20 minutes later, Blake called me. "This was you," he said. His voice was shaking with rage. "You went to the press." "I didn't go to anyone." "Bullshit. The timing's too perfect. The documents they have are too detailed. You gave them everything." "Prove it." "I don't need to prove it. I know it was you, and you just made the biggest mistake of your life." "Is that another threat?" "That's a promise. You think you're clever. You think you've won. All you've done is make this personal, and when I make things personal, people regret it." "Looking forward to seeing what you do." He hung up. I went into work like normal. My phone kept buzzing with calls from Liz, but I ignored them. Let her panic. Let her spiral. Let her understand what it felt like when your life was exposed and criticized and judged. That afternoon, the licensing board announced they were opening formal investigations into both Morrison custom renovations and Liz's real estate license. The next day, 3 of Blake's current clients pulled their contracts, citing the article. 2 of Liz's largest clients switched to different agents. Their reputations were imploding in real time, and I was just getting started. The licensing board investigations moved faster than expected. Within 2 weeks, they'd scheduled hearings for both Blake and Liz. The evidence Sarah Chen had published was impossible to ignore, and multiple former clients had filed formal complaints once the article gave them permission to speak up. Blake's business was imploding. 3 more clients terminated contracts. His workers quit when he couldn't make payroll. He posted angry rants on social media blaming jealous competitors and fake news, which only made him look more guilty. Liz was trying to salvage her reputation by distancing herself from Blake. She issued a statement saying she'd been unaware of any impropriety, that Blake had managed the construction side while she'd only handled sales. It might have worked if I hadn't sent Sarah Chen additional emails showing Liz's active involvement in every deal. The second article came out a week later. Realtor knew about fraud, participated actively. More documents, more evidence, more witnesses. Liz's phone stopped ringing with client calls and started ringing with reporters wanting comments. She stopped going to work, started drinking wine at noon. I watched her fall apart with the same cold detachment I'd been cultivating for months. We were still living in the same house, but not speaking. She'd sleep until late morning, then spend hours on her laptop trying to mount some kind of defense. I'd go to work, come home, and retreat to my workshop. The satisfaction I'd expected from watching her suffer wasn't really coming. Instead, I just felt hollow, like I was executing a plan because I'd committed to it, not because it was bringing me any peace, but I couldn't stop now. I'd gone too far to turn back. Blake showed up at my work on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at a residential service call, rekeying a house in Redmond. I'd just finished and was loading tools back into my truck when his pickup roared into the driveway. He got out looking like he hadn't slept in days. Unshaven, eyes wild, moving with barely contained violence. "We need to talk," he said. "I'm working." "I don't give a shit. You've destroyed my business. You've destroyed Liz. Now you're going to fix it." "I'm not fixing anything." "Yes, you are. You're going to tell the reporter you lied. Tell her you made everything up because you were jealous. Discredit the story." "Why would I do that?" "Because if you don't, I'm going to make your life hell. I know people. I know how to hurt you in ways you can't trace back to me." "More threats. You're really consistent with those." He took a step closer. "This isn't a threat. This is reality. You think you're smart? You think you're tough? You're not. You're just a bitter husband who got lucky finding some old documents. But luck runs out. So does patience. Get out of here before I call the cops. Call them. Tell them you're being harassed by someone whose life you destroyed with lies." "They weren't lies. Everything that's been published is documented truth. It's truth taken out of context, made to look worse than it is. No, it's exactly as bad as it is. You and Liz ran scams for years. You threatened and harassed anyone who challenged you. You destroyed Dennis Volkoff's entire life. That's not out of context. That's just reality. You drove him out of the country. He drove himself out of the country because he was paranoid and weak. Sure, keep telling yourself that." Blake grabbed my shirt and shoved me back against my truck. "You don't get to judge me. You don't know what it's like to build something from nothing, to fight for every contract, to deal with entitled clients who demand perfection for discount prices. I did what I had to do to survive. You did what you wanted to do because you're cruel. There's a difference." He shoved me harder. I didn't fight back. Just let him be the aggressor while I remained calm. "Hit me," I said. "Go ahead. Give me another reason to make your life worse." His hand drew back. I saw the punch coming and didn't flinch, but it never landed. The homeowner came running out. "Hey, what's going on?" Blake dropped his hand and stepped back, forced his face into something neutral. "Nothing, just a conversation." "Didn't look like nothing. I'm calling the police." "That won't be necessary," I said. "Mr. Morrison was just leaving." Blake stared at me with pure hatred. Then he got in his truck and peeled out of the driveway, leaving rubber on the pavement. The homeowner looked at me with concern. "You okay? You want me to call the cops anyway?" "No, I'm fine. Just an upset client. Happens sometimes." "If you're sure." "I'm sure. Thank you." I finished loading my truck and left. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, from adrenaline. Blake had almost hit me. If the homeowner hadn't come out, he probably would have. Good. The more desperate he became, the more mistakes he'd make. That night, Liz came to my workshop. "Blake called me," she said. "He told me what happened. He's losing it, Jake. He's really losing it." "Not my problem." "It is your problem. He blames both of us. If he does something crazy, then he'll face consequences. That's how life works. You really don't care, do you, about what you're doing to us?" "Should I?" "We were married for 8 years. We built a life together. That has to mean something. It meant something before you destroyed it. Now it means nothing." She sat down on my workbench, looking exhausted. "I keep trying to figure out when you became this person, when the man I married turned into someone who could be this cruel. I learned from the best. I made mistakes. I admitted that. But this, what you're doing, it's sociopathic." Interesting word choice from someone who helped terrorize a man into fleeing the country. "I didn't terrorize anyone. That was Blake. You enabled it. You benefited from it. You're just as guilty." "Fine. I'm guilty. I did terrible things. I'm sorry. Is that what you want to hear? I'm sorry. Now please, stop this. Stop destroying everything." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because I'm not done yet." She looked at me like I was a stranger. "What else is there? You've already ruined both our careers, exposed all our secrets, destroyed our reputations. What else could you possibly want?" "I want you to feel what Dennis felt. Real fear, real loss. The understanding that your entire life can be dismantled by someone who doesn't care about your suffering." "That's sick. That's justice." "No, that's revenge. And revenge doesn't heal anything. It just makes you as bad as the people who hurt you." "Maybe, but I'm okay with that." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she got up and left without another word. I sat there in the silence of my workshop, surrounded by tools and lock mechanisms and security equipment, all the instruments of my trade, all the ways I'd learned to break into places people wanted sealed. I'd been so focused on breaking Liz and Blake that I hadn't noticed I was breaking myself, becoming someone I wouldn't have recognized a year ago, someone driven by cold anger instead of any principle or plan beyond destruction. But I couldn't stop now, not when I was so close. The licensing board hearings happened 2 weeks later. I attended Liz's hearing as a spectator, sitting in the back of the room while she tried to defend herself. She was good. She'd hired a lawyer who presented her as a victim of Blake's schemes, someone who'd trusted the wrong partner and gotten dragged into situations she hadn't fully understood. She cried at appropriate moments, expressed remorse, promised it would never happen again. The board wasn't buying it. They had too much evidence. Emails where Liz explicitly discussed hiding profits, messages where she'd coordinated with Blake on which contractors to use for under-the-table work, her own handwriting on documents that proved she'd known exactly what they were doing. Ms. Brennan, the board chair said, the evidence shows a pattern of knowing and willing participation in fraudulent practices over multiple years. This wasn't a one-time mistake or poor judgment. This was systematic deception for financial gain. I understand how it looks, Liz said, but I was in an abusive business relationship. Blake controlled everything. I was scared to speak up. The evidence doesn't support that. The evidence shows you initiated several of these deals. You recruited clients. You structured the shell companies. Ms. Brennan, you weren't a victim. You were an active participant. The hearing lasted 3 hours. At the end, they suspended her license pending a full investigation. She walked out looking destroyed. Blake's hearing was the next day. He skipped it entirely, which meant an automatic revocation of his contractor's license. Within 48 hours, both of them were officially barred from their professions. I watched it all unfold with grim satisfaction. This was what I'd wanted. This was the consequence they'd avoided for years. But something felt wrong, empty, like I'd won a game that had stopped being fun halfway through. 3 days later, Liz moved out. I came home from work to find half the house empty. She'd taken her clothes, her files, her personal items. Left a note on the kitchen counter. Jake, I can't stay here anymore. I can't wake up every day in a house with someone who hates me. You got what you wanted. I've lost everything. I hope that brings you peace. L. I stood in the empty bedroom reading the note over and over. This was it. The marriage was over. The life we'd built was gone. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt tired. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Jake Brennan? A woman's voice? Yes. This is Officer Stevens with the Seattle PD. I'm calling about Blake Morrison. He's been arrested. My stomach dropped. Arrested for what? He was caught trying to break into your residence. A neighbor called it in. Mr. Morrison is claiming you've been harassing him, that he was defending himself. We're going to need you to come down and give a statement. I'll be right there. I drove to the station. Blake was in an interrogation room when I arrived, visible through the one-way glass. He looked defeated, slumped in his chair, staring at nothing. Officer Stevens took my statement. I told her about the threatening texts, the confrontation at my work, the escalating harassment. I showed her the security footage of him trying to break into my house, clearly visible, trying to jimmy the back door with a crowbar. Has Mr. Morrison made any specific threats? She asked. Multiple. He's been increasingly unstable since the news articles came out. What news articles? I explained about the fraud investigation, the licensing board hearings, everything that had been exposed. Officer Stevens took notes, her expression growing more serious. So Mr. Morrison has lost his business and his professional license because of your involvement in bringing evidence to light? I didn't break the law. I just exposed what they'd been hiding. I'm not suggesting you did anything wrong. I'm trying to understand his motivation. This sounds like escalating retaliation over a civil dispute. It was always more than a civil dispute. Morrison destroyed someone's life 5 years ago. My wife was involved. I made sure people knew about it. So this is revenge. This is accountability. She looked at me for a long moment. Mr. Brennan, I'm sympathetic to what you've been through, but you need to be careful. When you back someone into a corner, especially someone with violent tendencies, they often do desperate things. He tried to break into my house. That's on him? Yes. But you've been systematically destroying his life for months. A prosecutor might argue you provoked the situation. I exposed the truth. If he can't handle consequences, that's his problem. Just be careful. Sometimes winning isn't worth what you have to become to get there. She let me go after another hour of questions. Blake was being held pending charges for attempted burglary and violation of a restraining order I hadn't known Liz had filed weeks ago. I drove home to my half-empty house and sat in the dark, thinking about Officer Stevens's words. Sometimes winning isn't worth what you have to become to get there. I'd spent 6 months becoming someone I barely recognized. Someone calculating and cold and willing to destroy people without hesitation. I'd told myself it was justice, but really it had just been cruelty dressed up in righteous language. Blake and Liz had done terrible things. They deserved consequences. But had I taken it too far? Had I become the very thing I hated about them? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I was alone in a house full of ghosts, and the victory I'd chased so relentlessly tasted like ash.